Freddy, Bell, Chantel, baby, what a dream. All the hottest music, and we got the tea. Take a sip every single morning of the week. 6 to 10, the radio was blazing. What you expect me to be on station? So go on today and make sure you tune to KMOJ. It ain't none better than this. Been rocking in the city since 76. It's what we get Fitzgerald the king. If you agree, let me hear y'all sing. Freddy, Bell in the morning, Chantel in the morning. Twin Cities, good morning. 89.9, wake up, work out. Freddy, Bell in the morning, Chantel in the morning.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning to you. You got here right on time. How to do you on this 12th day of September 2018 as the Southeast is taking it right squarely on the chin right now. Every person in that area should be taking this storm seriously. I know that we have some fans who are listening in that area of the country. And if you have relatives there, if they don't know, something is wrong. But they say that this is the big one, and it appears that it will be a direct hit on that part of our country. I'm Freddy Bell. I'm with the morning team. Here are today's, well, first of all, today's color of the day is granular green. Don't be called dead unless in anything granular green. That is our color of the day. And good morning to all the fine folks in Cottage Grove. Thank you for waking up with Freddy Bell and Chantel Sings in the morning. Here are today's words of the wise. Look at things in a new way. Look at things in a new way are today's words of the wise. And today is also the National Day of Encouragement. It's a day that is intended for all of us to do something to offer encouragement to those around us, whether it's someone at work or in our personal lives. But more importantly, today is National Chocolate Milkshake Day. First introduced in the 1800s. They were originally an alcoholic eggnog type beverage. And then it turned into a non-alcoholic treat in 1900, but they didn't add ice cream until 1920. The three most popular flavors are, say it with me, chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. National Chocolate Milkshake Day. Please welcome to our morning show microphones an individual, and I had to smile when I saw this, and I had to agree that he is known as part Sherlock Holmes and a storyteller, of course. Please welcome to our morning show microphones from Fox 9 News, Tom Lyden, investigative reporter, a 25-year stint there. You just celebrated a couple of days ago. Congratulations and welcome.
I did. It's really nice. 25 years is a long time. I never thought I would be there 25 years. I like to say I gave half my youth to that place. Well, probably all my youth to Fox 9, but I'm happy I've done it. And I'm bumming that Chantel isn't here this morning.
Well, you know, she was looking forward to being here, but, life has its call.
I met her over at the North Market not that long ago.
Wow. Did she sing to you?
No, she did not. Huh? But you know what? I think she told me about her singing.
Tom, you've got a big report coming north at a crossroads. How did that show, first of all, come about? Why that show?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, in some ways, it began for me with the Thurman Blevins shooting. I mean, we've been working on it beforehand, but I think it really kind of got momentum around that time, and we decided we really need to do something. And one of the reasons why is for me, after being here 25 years, it seemed a little bit like deja vu. Thurman Blevins and Jamar Clark seemed so much like Tycel Nelson so many years ago. And it seems like we have these patterns that sort of repeat. And the names change, the figures change on, whether they're the activists or whoever else, but we seem to go in these cycles and the ball never seems to move forward. But as we started kind of looking at crime, which is really where we started out kind of looking, we decided, the perspective needs to be so much wider. And in fact, the story tonight, and it's a half hour at 9:30 tonight, really deals, in some ways, not that much with crime, because we've decided the lens really needs to be so much larger. In fact, I think one of the problems when it comes specifically to the media looking at North Minneapolis is we focus too much on crime. And as you know, these issues and issues of crime and public safety are really connected to so many other issues. They're connected to housing. They're connected to the wealth equity gap, all these different gaps. Minnesota loves to think of itself as this really progressive, emerald city. But the reality is we have some of the widest racial disparities in the entire country in terms of housing, income, and education.
So, Tom, through what lens are you looking? I know it's a 30-minute report and you're looking at a number of different segments of our community. So through what lens are you looking at poverty, for example, housing, transportation, for example?
By the way, 30 minutes is not nearly as much time as you think once you get into these issues, right? I mean, seriously, we were looking at, there was so much that we think we have the best stuff in there, but some did get left off on the editing room floor. But really, we take this look at the history, and this is a big term, but structural racism, and we really don't even use that term in this story, but that's really what we're talking about. And we go back to the early turn of the last century, around 1910, and look at housing covenants, these racial covenants that were literally written into property deeds that said no one of Negro blood could own this property. And we look at how that really evolved into redlining, and how redlining in so many ways set the stage for the mortgage and foreclosure crisis in 2008. And we're still seeing it even today. But when you look at housing, and the reason I think it's so key, is housing is the way that people create wealth in this country, and always have. Less so today than they have historically.
Right.
But it's the way you accumulate generational wealth that's passed on. And not only that, it is so key to starting a business and entrepreneurship. If you look at the way people do that, normally they take a second out on their home, and that's how they go out and they start their business. African Americans, by and large, on the north side, have been left out of that equation of wealth building in our community. And I think that really lays the groundwork for so many of these other issues that we talk about.
Everyone, we're talking with Tom Lyden. He's the investigative reporter at Fox 9 News. The name of the program tonight is North at a Crossroads. We were just speaking with Chief Knight this morning, and he was saying, fairly close to what you're saying, that housing and, of course, employment are keys to stemming the crime that we see in our communities. Does your report talk about how does it come to the crossroads where crime, housing, and employment come together? Do we see that intersection?
I don't know if we see it come full circle to employment. Certainly that's a huge issue in terms of when you look at people who are trying to access housing and why they may be turned away. Many times it's for these low-level, criminal records. And we know that in terms of the ACLU study a few years ago, that African Americans are far more likely in Minneapolis to be arrested for low-level crimes. Jaywalking, a small amount of marijuana possession, and that has a lot to do with the ability of people to get housing. So these issues are all really interconnected. I think one of the things that we do in crime, and crime has been covered so much in Minneapolis, and I think there's the reality of crime, and then I think there's the perception. I think the perception of crime, in many ways, has done more damage than the reality of crime, because it
How
has.
so?
Well, I think it has deterred a lot of investment. I think if you ask people, especially in Greater Minnesota or anywhere, I say North Minneapolis, what's the first thing you think of? And I think for far too many people who aren't familiar with the neighborhoods here, and there are 15 very different neighborhoods here, the first thing they may tell you is crime. I think that hurts investment. That hurts people from casually discovering North Minneapolis. And there is a reality of crime, and I don't want to to cut that short. That is a real reality for a lot of people. About a third of all violent crime happens on the north side. If you look at over the last 20 years, about half the homicides. But I think and I do a little bit of a mea culpa in this. I've covered crime for 25 years, and a lot of the stories that I did in North Minneapolis were crime stories. And what I think happens with that is the steady repetition of that. It becomes very one note. Crime does not define North Minneapolis any more than it defines any other community. But when it's that one note repetition, day after day, I think that creates an enduring perception and a stereotype that in many ways has done more harm economically to North Minneapolis than anything else.
Well, I know the Kellogg and St. Paul Foundation, and we're a part of the study that looks at the racial narratives, particularly coming from the media itself. And for example, we've seen the protests and so forth that have happened. It's interesting that when you look at the news media, and I'm a part of that we'll say, on Fox 9, that a group of protesters are demonstrating XYZ issue. It's interesting that that's the narrative, but it's a different slant when you say people are coming together to talk about their concern about a problem that they see in their community.
Right.
Still saying the same thing, but
Sure.
protesters demonstrating, that's a connotation. And Tom, you're a part of that.
Absolutely, and I think we acknowledge that in this piece. I mean, I'm not saying one story tonight is solving everything, but I think it's a level of awareness. I mean, I'm not saying I'm suddenly woke here, and everything's all going to be different. I mean, and there is crime. You have to cover that because that's also a reality. What I think is really interesting about what you say is, there's always been that discrepancy. As you know, back in 1967, the riots along Plymouth Avenue. Some people called it a riot. Other people called it an uprising. So there's always been this kind of duality about how we look at protest and demonstration, and I think that's especially true on the North Side.
Is the news media part of the problem of the North Side in the way that we report?
I think so. I have to be honest with you, Freddie. I think that is an issue. And again, I'm not saying you don't cover homicide or crime. What I think you need to do is have a wider context. I think you need to have, and I don't think it's any particular story, but I think it is also about balance. It is about not just covering the bad in a neighborhood, it is also about covering all the good. That when there is some positive story or a hot weather story, that you don't go to Edina to necessarily cover that hot weather pool story, but that you're all over at, Farview Park or at North Commons covering that story as well about the heat. It's about having the balance and looking at a community that's not just one note.
What are you hoping that people take away from the report tonight, North at a Crossroads?
Well, I certainly do hope they don't think that I'm white-splaining this because, and I can understand, I think there are two different audiences, right? I think there are people in North Minneapolis who are aware of this, who are aware of all these power dynamics. And, there's this motto in journalism, follow the money trail. To some extent, when we are looking at housing covenants and redlining, that's really what we're trying to do. Not follow where the money's going, but really where the money has not been going historically. So I think that's a big part of our story. I think there are two audiences. I think there are people on the North Side who will see this, who will acknowledge it and say, well, yeah, that's what I've been telling you for years. But I think there are other people in Minnesota who will say, I always knew about crime in the North Side, but I've never seen the lens expanded in this way. And I never knew there was this sort of, I don't want to say hidden power dynamic, because for people who know, they've always known this has been there, but there is this sort of, these strings that you don't see in terms of housing covenants and redlining, and a legacy that in many ways I think the North Side still lives with.
Since you mentioned mea culpa, we're just about out of time. So as a 25-year veteran, do you take this narrative back to your newsroom and say, guys, look, they're not necessarily protesters, maybe they are protesting, but they're people who are coming together in a common cause?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I think we do a level of that introspection all the time. I mean, that particular issue I think is great, and I'll be honest, I have not heard that people versus protesters thing, but I think you're really right on about that. That's interesting. And when I think I work in a newsroom that's really receptive to criticism, both internally and externally. I think we try to not be defensive, and I think we try to live in that place where we're receptive to it and getting better all the time.
Is there a part two to your piece tonight?
Freddie, I can be honest, I think there should be a part 2 and a part 3. There are a couple of tentacles, I don't want to go into it too much, but there are a couple of tentacles that we kind of briefly explored tonight that we're coming back and going deeper in another way. I mean, I feel like this is a little bit of a new beat for me in terms of trying to get beyond kind of the surface, especially in North Minneapolis.
So as a person who's covered Andrew Cunanan and a number of incredible stories across the country, it's interesting that you're taking this look through a different lens at what's happening here on the North Side. Thanks for being with us this morning.
It was an absolute pleasure.